Hello everyone, Blitzcrank here, back with some more Warfare Online. I haven't done a video in a long time. Haven't done one since early access. I do have some videos up on my Twitch channel of me streaming and sort of giving some tips and talking about what's going on there. Make sure you check those out. They're fairly recent. Um, the tips and tricks in my old videos still stand. I didn't go too deep into loadouts or balance or deck building or anything, or all these things that have gone under a lot of changes since early access. So if anyone's a new player kind of just getting into the game and looking for some really basic information, those videos I think are still useful. Go back and check them out. For this one, I'm finally going to dive into my platoons and my loadouts and my decks and how I'm putting all this together. And I am having quite a bit of success with both of these. One is an infantry-based platoon, and the other is a vehicle-based platoon. Both pretty strong, so I'm just going to go over all the loadouts and kind of some general stuff about my playstyle and what my strategy is using each of these decks, and also go into the deck building and the operations, which are both really important parts of this game. So let's jump right in and look at my infantry-based platoon. During early access, I was doing a lot of really experimental, crazy things, just messing around with different types of infantry-based platoons. A lot of times I was using all infantry with no vehicles, and sometimes I was like super specializing all of these guys to do one specific thing and just experimenting with different unlocks. Sometimes I would play people who are on the Discord server and they'd get out of the match and be like, what is this? Like, why are you doing this? And I'd say, I don't know, I'm just kind of messing around. But since early access, or since release, I should say, I've been playing a little more standard. My win rate has definitely increased. I'm still being experimental. I'm still trying new things, and there's a really important part of this deck that I'll talk about in a little bit that is sort of experimental and different. So that's something I like to do. Sometimes it means I lose a lot, but it's still fun. It's furthering my knowledge of the game. It's it's enjoyable to try and find unorthodox and weird things that work. But my vehicle-based platoon, especially, which we'll get to in a minute, has become my standard build, which is actually giving me a fair amount of wins against high-level players. So we'll get to that in a minute. But right now we have my infantry-based deck. And I guess I'll start with the units and go over each one and just talk a little bit about the loadouts and kind of how I go about choosing different unlocks and combining different unlocks. After that, we'll go into the deck and then the operations. So Rifleman, really popular choice right now. A lot of people are using these guys. Turns out if you give them grenades, they can be just as lethal as assaults are. They build quicker than assaults are. So they've kind of come to overshadow assaults. In early access, assaults were really the infantry unit of choice. I feel like Riflemen have kind of surpassed them. So the way I have my Rifleman set up right now is a plus damage. Obviously, that's always good. Now, the minus range looks really bad. But given the way that I use these units, the minus range doesn't hurt quite so much because these guys are typically sent into the front lines. They're sent charging. They're not typically sitting back and being a defensive unit. So that's pretty good. It does cut down the range a fair amount, but I don't think it's enough to be debilitating. The extra damage is great. So that's what we've gone for the primary weapon there. We come down here, grenades. You have to give your rifleman grenades. Grenades are a huge part of the meta right now as far as infantry are concerned. Taking out units in cover, doing damage to vehicles, having a good area of effect damage, splash damage, whatever you want to call it. Really important. Now, typically I try not to take unlocks that decrease reinforcements, and I try not to take unlocks that decrease health. But if you come out here and look at my operations, we have infantry operations, which is reducing my vehicle reinforcements by 1 and giving me 2 extra riflemen. So even though I'm losing a rifleman by taking this, I'm actually losing, I'm sorry, I'm losing 2 riflemen by taking this. I'm gaining them back by using this. So this might be debatable, but giving plus damage and plus grenades really just makes this such a better unit that I can't not do it. So that's what I went for. And obviously down the line there are arguably some better unlocks. Wouldn't mind having the heavy grenade kit instead, but we're just not there yet. So all this stuff is going to be based on what I have available to me right now. I don't have everything unlocked, so that's what we've gone with. Giving grenades to riflemen, really, really important, really strong. Not to mention a damage and health boost, and we're offsetting this negative reinforcement with some other things. Veterans, I just saw. Oh, this is why I'm minusing my second reinforcement. I'm sorry. This is why I'm down 2, but I'm gaining 2 back. Gaining a lot of damage here. This one might be debatable. I know some people are going to come on and say, oh, you shouldn't take negative reinforcements twice, but these guys do have a lot of damage. It's making them a really solid unit. Protection in open plus movement speed was what I had before. I think that's still pretty good because these units are typically going to be deployed in the open. They're not going to be sitting back defensively. They're going to be leading the charge with your tank pushes and your LAV pushes and your BTR pushes and whatnot. So this is also a good option. So let's keep it moving along here. Assaults. These guys in this particular deck, I have set up just as strong as I can get them. Minus aim time plus damage, plus health plus damage, and plus health plus damage again. These guys are just sturdy. They've got really high damage. They've got pretty high HP. These guys are just go for broke kind of units, and in the playstyle I'm using with this infantry based deck, these guys are actually, I treat them almost like they're a vehicle. I try to deploy them at the right time. I try to deploy them at times where I have the opportunity to save up for them and make it worth it for me. Again, once I have things like heavy grenade kit, actually heavy grenade kit's not really that worth it. Once I get further down here, some of these might be more worth it, but right now these guys are just super high damage output with a good amount of HP, and I really wait till the right time to deploy this unit. AT team, I honestly think are the single most important infantry unit in this game. If there's one infantry unit that is a must-have and that you should have in every platoon and every setup, it is definitely the AT team. Now you notice I'm running standard rifle and nothing here and minus launcher aim time, and there's 2 reasons for that. One is that I don't have one, this is minus range. I don't think that's ever a good idea against vehicles. You know, you want to be getting those shots off as soon as possible, as soon as the vehicle is within range of you. And if you look at this range debuff, it's huge. I mean, there is no point behind that with the small amount of damage you're gaining. You always want to be looking at these bars down here while you're clicking between the different unlocks, because this is going to show you exactly how it's affecting your units. And if you go back and forth between nothing and this, I mean, that much damage is not worth that loss of range, especially with an AT team. So given the unlocks I have at the current moment, that I'm going with standard issue. Same thing down here. Resistance to explosions I could take, but it's increasing the timer. So the timer is the other thing you really want to look at. Granted, it's only buying me a few seconds. A little less than 2 seconds there. But AT teams, we've all been in situations where we need to get AT teams out really fast. You know, we're on the back foot. There's vehicles coming across. We need to get these guys out and in position. And honestly, explosives, which are 90% of the time grenades, are going to kill your AT teams regardless. Tanks, have very weak accuracy against infantry units. They're bound to miss quite a bit. So once again, I just don't see this resistance versus explosives to really be worth it. Giving your AT units grenades or plus damage versus infantry, which is somewhere in here. Maybe that's Americans. I'm still in American mode. But anyway, configuring your AT units to have grenades and basically set them up to do damage versus infantry is not really worth it. It doesn't really make sense. These guys exist for the sake of doing damage to vehicles, and that should be their purpose, and that should be what they're configured to do. And I'm not trying to cram myself into a box here, but something about, something like damage versus heavy and light vehicles, the aim time I'm going to talk about in just a second. This makes more sense than giving these guys grenades. Giving these guys grenades is just silly. They're going to die before they can even throw a grenade. These guys are here to shoot at vehicles. So down here we have the minus launcher aim time. A lot of people might be tempted to take some of these other ones. Minus the resupply time. Oh look, I can make him even faster. That's great, but that's minusing reinforcements. This is a critical unit. We don't want to limit our access to these guys. So what the minus launcher aim time does, even though it nerfs your damage a little bit, there are a lot of situations where these AT teams, say you have one AT team versus one tank. Your AT team's in heavy cover. With this launcher aim time, it might be able to get 3 shots off rather than 2 before it dies because of this launcher aim time. So the damage debuff, and if you look, it's just a little bit. Just a little bit if you go between none, RPG, just that little. I mean, sure that's damage. Doing damage is good. But the amount of damage you're going to get from an extra shot is much greater than the damage you lose from equipping this. So if you're in a situation where this AT team can get 3 shots off rather than 2, this is well worth it. Okay, so that's what we're going for with that. Now we go to machine gun teams, and this is where I'm talking about how I'm still kind of being experimental, because right now there's a lot of people who are like, oh, machine guns, they're so useless, they sit in cover and they get blown up by grenades, and they're supposed to be this really defensive unit, but they just die to riflemen and assault and anything with grenades and any type of explosives, and they just die so fast. They take longer to build than both riflemen and assaults, depending on your unlocks. So my thought with these guys, going into an infantry-based setup, which I honestly believe is for infantry, at least. Running 2 or 3 vehicles is kind of what I consider to be standard. Running 4 or 5 infantry is what I would consider to be an infantry-focused deck. So my goal is to get an infantry-focused deck that is functional and that holds up to some decent players and holds up to some decent builds. And I want machine gunners to be a part of that, because I think they're still more valuable than snipers are, even though snipers can be really great in the right hands and in the right situation. They're a little trickier to play with. I think they take a smarter player to be successful with. But machine guns are good. They've got a fair amount of HP and damage. If you look through here, there's a lot of unlocks they have that they give them bonuses in cover. Let's see, entrenched is a big one, protection in cover, and then resistance versus explosives. They have a few different options for that. So at first glance, these guys look like they should be a defensive unit that sits behind heavy cover for most of the match and just really tries to hold the front line. I said screw all that. When these guys are sitting ducks, they die really fast. So I'm going to use these guys in the same way I would in assault or a rifleman. These guys do not have grenade unlocks. It is not possible to give them grenades. So that automatically makes them weaker as an infantry unit. But I think with the right positioning, they can still be very, very strong. So I've got a range buff here, which I'm taking. Down here we're taking a damage, and we are taking a little bit of resistance to explosives to kind of help survive those grenades a little bit. Still not really sure about this one. I think the plus damage is the big one on this unlock. Definitely like having a little extra damage on anything. It's always good. And as far as the ones I have unlocked, that's what I've gone for. Here we have plus damage versus infantry. That's what we're going to be deploying these guys against. We're not going to expect them to do a lot of damage versus vehicles. So these three things are what I've gone for. And like I said, the biggest thing, apart from this loadout, like this isn't really that weird. You know, this looks like it could be a defensive unit still, even with these unlocks. But the way that I play with these is completely different than the way I used to play with them. I don't hide them behind heavy cover and let them sit there the whole game anymore and hold the front lines. There's some situations where I might do that, but I am more than happy to send these guys charging across the field with a tank or an LAV or anything to do extra damage. Now, like I said, they don't have grenades, so whenever possible, I try to have a rifleman or assault ahead of these guys in the push, so that rifleman and assault are grenading, and the machine guns with the extra range are coming behind them, helping clean up infantry, preferably in front of a vehicle. And with ATs involved in the push, we want the ATs behind the vehicle. So my general idea is rifleman assault in the front of the push, okay, machine gun behind them, then your vehicle, and then ATs behind the vehicle. And that's just kind of how I like to line my pushes up. And you want to be thinking about these things when you're putting these loadouts together and putting these builds together. You want to be thinking about how you're going to be attacking, how the units are going to be positioned, and what role they play in every single battle that they get deployed in. And these machine guns are pretty hardy little bastards. 2 or 3 of them can stop a vehicle push. Obviously, they're not going to do a ton of damage to the vehicles. They're not going to typically kill the vehicles, but they can buy you a lot of time. They can buy you a lot of time to get more AT teams out, buy you a lot of times to get more vehicles out. So I'm not giving up on MGs. I'm giving them a shot. I'm changing the way that I play with them and changing my approach. So far that's been doing me a lot of good. A lot of times they're throwaway units. I'm like, oh, these guys are going to die really fast. But if they're used smartly in the right situation, I think they're still very valid. I have a T90 as the vehicle. Have done BTR instead, but I think having this set up as an anti-vehicle tank, a little bit of range, same idea as the AT team. It's going to help you get an extra shot off before the other tank gets to you or before the other vehicle gets to you. That's worth a lot. This is a significant amount of range you're seeing down here. That's great. Plus damage versus heavy and light vehicles, minus damage versus infantry. We got all kinds of anti-infantry. We got 3 anti-infantry units in this deck. We're totally fine taking a hit to infantry damage here and having these tanks be specialized for other tanks. Now, you'll notice that I have some blank spots here. Some of those are simply because I don't really have any unlocks that I care for. This one's great. This is one that I would care for. But I feel like if you get too much over a minute with the tanks, it starts getting a little crazy. So 1 minute and almost 12 seconds, I decided, And there might be people that debate that with me, but I have this tank set up specifically to be anti-vehicle, and this disruptor config I decided wasn't worth the extra time, which is perfectly okay. Even if you don't agree with this specific example of that, it's totally okay to leave holes in your units for the sake of keeping the timer down. How fast these guys come out is a very important part of the game. you don't want to just bloat these guys. I think the highest, I think if you set your tank up right, if you set this reinforcements and then, let's see, if you set reinforcements and then some of these other higher ones, you're getting up to 1 minute and 23 seconds almost with heavy config and this plus reinforcements, and that is just an insanely long time. I mean, that, sure, once the tank gets there, it's going to have all these upgrades and it's going to be so awesome and super special, but you don't want to die waiting for it. So always keep your timer in mind. Always be thinking about how fast these guys are being deployed, and not just about how strong they are, because that's really important too. So that's some general stuff about that. If you guys have a better way that you set up your unlocks and your units, please comment, you know, get in touch, talk on the forums, get on the Discord server. Let me know if you have better ways, suggestions for myself, other things you're having success with. There's no one way to play this game, but that's just a general idea of how I have these guys set up for my infantry base platoon. As far as the deck goes, we have Logistical Demand. These are great cards that give you 1 supply for each friendly unit on the battlefield. Supply, really important in this game. Support Supply Line is one I'm running here, which does give both players a little extra supply in the beginning of the game by reducing their first 3 draws by 2. So you have to watch out for that. You're giving your opponent a little advantage too. But the faster you can get these cards out and the cheaper they cost, you know, the quicker you can get an advantage over your opponent. And we'll be talking about Support Supply Line a little bit once I get into my vehicle-based unit. But we do have Logistical Demand, which costs nothing and gives us supply. So that, you know, if you have a handful of units on the field and you can deploy that, then all of a sudden you're jumping up to things like Rain of Fire, which is one of my elite cards, which does a lot of damage. It's a great card. You know, if you get these guys with 4 or 5 units on the field, you're jumping up to Rain of Fire really fast. So you want to be thinking about things that give you extra supply. Supply is a really big part of this game, and the deck building aspect of this game is half the battle, if not more. If not like 75%, 80% of the battle is all down here in your deck. These cards are very important. Attack Sites, very commonly chosen card. It's a basic card that anyone can get, anyone can craft. I think you actually start with these. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure you start with Attack Sites. These are great anti-vehicle cards. They're going to disable the vehicle's weapons for 15 seconds. They can be countered by different unlocks, so it's not going to work every time. But this is great. You know, this can really give you a chance to take out a vehicle before it does too much damage. So we've got 2 of those. Anti-tank teams, like I said, very important unit. We need as many of those as possible, especially in an infantry-based deck. These are so important when you're playing an infantry-focused strategy. You need these guys to deal with vehicles and to deal with vehicle decks. You need to trade them efficiently. You need to play conservative with them. And you need to have as many as possible. So we have 2 anti-tank teams. This is a Russia-specific card. We also have Reinforce, which gives 3 reinforcements to selected infantry unit. These are typically used on AT teams. Sometimes if I'm playing against a vehicle-based platoon, these will be used on riflemen to get a little extra punch, but I would say most of the time they do go to ATs. Some people have argued that having 2 in your deck is a little excessive. That might be true, but that's what I'm going with for now. Anti-tank artillery. For new players, this is worlds better than regular artillery. Regular artillery for me is kind of a placeholder right now because I don't have a lot of cards unlocked that I would like to have. So we have artillery strike here just to kind of give myself an extra fire support, be able to do some damage. But Anti-tank artillery and anti-tank mortars are much, much better than regular artillery and mortars. If you have the option between the two, you should always go with the anti-tank version. Oscar Mike, this is kind of a situational one. It does buff all your units. So if you have a really good push going, this can really make or break the game in the right situation. But I think it helps particularly in an infantry-based deck when you really need to be putting out as much damage as humanly possible against big vehicle pushes. This really does save my ass quite a bit. And it's also a basic card that everybody has. So those, when used smartly, are great. Heavy armor, another elite card. Not everybody has this. This gives me an extra tank. I am losing a tank from infantry operation here. I can justify this because I'm losing one tank to get 2 on all 4 of these different units. And it's also offsetting, like we said, the minus reinforcements from some of this other stuff we're taking. So that kind of... that kind of fits in, but losing this tank is okay because we have heavy armor, which is going to give me another one. So we're still ending up with the same number of tanks. This is another one that might be debatable depending on how you play and how you feel about all these cards and whatnot. But honestly, if you have heavy armor, I can't imagine why you wouldn't put it in your deck. This is a really cheap tank. It does give your opponent 5 supply. But the opportunity to deploy this at the same time as another vehicle or another tank, or to just put it at just the right time, whenever that time may be, is huge. It can really give you a huge advantage. So heavy armor, rain of fire, definitely my higher level strong cards. You don't need cards like this to be successful. Some people get scared away by stuff like this, but there are a lot of basic cards you can use to hold your own, and get you closer to unlocking things like this, collecting gold, collecting munitions, so that you can craft other cards. I play almost exclusively as Russia, so what I've done is I've gone through and I've actually scrapped all of my USA specific cards, scrapped all the operations that I don't care for, that I feel like I'm never going to use, and saved up my munitions, and I actually crafted heavy armor. Rain of Fire I was lucky and got at release in a supply box, but I did craft heavy armor. Also crafted 2 of these LAV support cards. These are advanced cards specific to Russia, which deploy a basic BTR 90 with no unlocks. And these are just kind of helping fill the void of a lack of vehicles in this deck. So even though this is an infantry focused deck, I do have 2 tanks and 2 LAVs available to me, which these guys will be supporting as well as they can. So yeah, that goes over most of my cards in here. Based on what I had, this is what I'm going with. I am tweaking this and changing things once in a while. Obviously, these artillery strikes could probably be replaced with something a little better. I am waiting for the S400. I need some counter cards in this deck, and I could use some better fire supports than artillery strike. But right now, these guys are kind of placeholders, so that I have some sort of fire support asset. You do need a good number of fire support assets in an infantry-based deck to help you clean out vehicles and to help you clean out infantry units and snipers that are giving you a hard time. So these artillery strikes, even though they're a basic card, I do find a lot of good use for them. We've already touched on my operations a little bit. This is reducing vehicles by 1, giving 2 extra reinforcements to my infantry. That's giving me 8 extra units at the cost of a tank, and infantry is what we're going for. So that's what we're doing there. This is increasing vehicle timers, reducing infantry timers. I'm still kind of torn about this. I think there might be a better option, but it is helping my infantry units come out quicker, which is very important. We can fill up the map and build our defenses and kind of get a stronghold going a lot faster, and then save up for these tank pushes and these LAV pushes And you know, getting your defenses out, getting your units on the field in a timely fashion so that you can wait for just that right window. Removing, you know, reducing timers is always a good thing. And I justify the increase in vehicle timers because I'm only running one vehicle. That's kind of a specialized thing. And then support supply line. This is really commonly used among high players. It's going to reduce your starting support assets. Be careful because you're giving that to your opponent also. But this is going to kind of lead me into my vehicle-based platoon. And I don't know what I changed, but I probably don't want to keep it. So my vehicle-based platoon, we're running 2 infantry units and all 3 vehicles. Now, I'm going to start with the operation assets on here. We have armor superiority. Vehicles take longer to resupply and increases friendly vehicle health. Things that increase health are huge, especially with vehicles. And this, I really think makes vehicles tough. Like I really think this is worth it. I don't know what else to say about it. I really think I can soak up more AT shots and more shots from other vehicles with this. My experience has been that this is very worth it. It's a very simple thing, you know. More health is great. Longer to resupply. Doesn't sound like a great thing, but I really think it's worth it in this situation. Outpost storage. This decreases our outpost health by 50, and it starts our battle with 2 supply. Now this combined with support supply line, which I also have in my infantry deck, this is giving me, this is reducing the cost of my starting supports by 2, and this is giving me +2 supply. So what this essentially means is that my starting, basically the first support I decide to play in the game costs 4 less than it would originally. And this allows me to put out some really early aggression. If I start the battle with 2 supply here, and my starting support asset costs are reduced by 2 here, then I can literally deploy where'd it go? I can literally deploy heavy armor basically at the very beginning of the game. I only have to wait for 1 supply, and this tank can be on its way. This is a vehicle-based platoon, so I also have the LAV card, like I said. That's only going to cost 4 if I were to draw that in the beginning. Same thing with the fast mover supports. This card is only going to cost 2 if I were to draw this in the very opening of the game. So sometimes I put that together with a rifleman and get some really early aggression going. This is actually more of an aggressive deck than my infantry-based deck is, if you can believe that. A lot of people think infantry is like the rush sort of strategy, but this vehicle-based platoon is more of a rush deck than my infantry-based platoon. My infantry-based platoon, I have to sit back and be defensive and trade really efficiently and really conserve every unit. This thing, I can start throwing stuff in their face right away. So riflemen, same exact setup. Well, we've got a little different here. We've got the assault training. Actually, here, what am I doing? Yeah. I think I want that to be veterans. And then same idea. You know, leading the charge. I may have been messing around with the difference between these two. Let's see, veterans and assault. I don't think the movement speed really helps much. The timer is actually a little lower with veterans. So the plus damage, the minus reinforcements hurts in a vehicle-based platoon. So that was probably my thinking, is to not lose 2 reinforcements here. So that's kind of the difference between the vehicle base and the infantry base, is that with the infantry one, I have the operation that's giving me extra assets, or giving me extra reinforcements, excuse me. But in the vehicle-based platoon, I don't have that luxury. So I went ahead and decided that having 2 extra riflemen is probably a better idea than having a little extra damage and having 2 less, because I don't have anything offsetting this. So that's the one change there. Riflemen should always have grenades, though. Make sure you're giving your riflemen grenades. It's the biggest anti-infantry asset that you have. And these guys build significantly quicker than assaults do, so that makes it even more valuable. Okay, onto the AT, same exact setup, minus launcher aim time. These guys are here to kill vehicles and kill vehicles alone. They come out in 17 seconds, as long as you're positioning them right and putting them out at the right time and not throwing them away. This is great. You know, get as many shots off on the tank as you can before they die. That is their sole purpose. It is up to these other guys, whether it be riflemen or assault or MG or anyone else, it's up to them to support these, or even other vehicles. Going into our light vehicle, you know, having one of these ahead of a few ATs can really help. Let's see, the GIZ-30 I have set up just to pretty much be all around. I've got damage, range damage, health, you know, pretty obvious stuff. Chose not to take a third unlock here. Damage versus heavy vehicles. These guys are not good against heavy vehicles any way you look at it. They're going to die before they do enough damage. It's not worth the extra supply time, even at only a few seconds. This is minus reinforcements for only a few seconds. Better. And I don't really see any of these other ones as being worth it. I think actually range. Oh, that's taking away damage though. So some might argue that this would be worth it, even though it's less damage. It gives plus range, starts doing damage earlier. Damage versus AT teams. This is super specialized. There's only going to be really specific situations in which that helps you, so I try to steer clear of stuff like that. This one, once I get up to it, will definitely be worth it, I think. Although it does put it up to 42 seconds, so that's always something to consider. It's okay to leave these blank though, if it keeps the timer down and still serves the purpose. Don't be afraid to leave these blank. Going up to our BTR, we've got these guys set up to be anti-infantry specifically, and our tank set up to be anti-vehicles. The tank bonus damage to heavy and light vehicles, a little bit of extra range to get that one more shot off when possible. BTR, we've got plus damage versus infantry, minus versus vehicles, which is okay because we have other things to deal with vehicles. We've got ATs and we've got tanks. These guys are configured twice to do plus damage versus infantry. This one giving a little extra health, and then nothing here to keep the timer down. So yeah, that's the general idea. Like I said, you might have a better way of doing this. There's players out there who are a lot better than I am that could definitely critique this and do things their own way. It does depend a lot on how many of these unlocks that you have, and on which vehicles and what play style you're going for, and what your platoon looks like, how many vehicles you're running versus how many infantry. There's a lot of factors that go into what makes a good setup, but I just wanted to go through my two to give people an idea of how I made these choices and how I've set up these units, and to just make the point that my tank is anti-vehicle and my BTR is anti-infantry, and my GAZ-30 is just it's kind of a tank or a throwaway unit, something to sort of soak up damage maybe in front of these guys or in front of a of a different push. The AT teams are there to do damage to vehicles specifically. The riflemen are there to throw grenades and take units out of cover and to do damage versus infantry. You want to think about specializing each of your units in that way and then having them all work together for a common goal. Operation assets you want to be careful with. Everything has a negative supply in this game, which is part of what makes putting these builds together fun. So you want to be aware of how these things are negatively impacting you and whether or not it's worth it. The combination of outpost storage with support supply line, like we said, gives us a really strong early game. Armor superiority makes our vehicles really, really tough, and since we have 3 in our deck, that is paying for itself. Even with the little extra time, I think that's still worth it. But it's up to you to make those calls. But definitely look up some YouTube videos, read the forums, read the Steam guides, get on the Discord server and ask us for help. There's a lot of good players that will help you and give you advice. You can post a screenshot of your builds up there, and people would give you advice, offer you tips and pointers, and help you along. Don't get discouraged if you're a new player. You can craft a few decent cards to get a good deck going. You can grind up a few games to get some basic unlocks that will help you hold your own. So hopefully this video just gives people an idea of how to go about doing this and my thought process behind selecting these different things and picking and choosing, because you really want to be thinking about all of this. It's easy to think at face value that having all 3 of these full means a stronger unit. But the way this game is set up, all these things have a negative impact on you also. So sometimes leaving these empty, like I said, is great. And picking and choosing ones that serve the specific unit's purpose is really important. And that was the big point I wanted to try and make with this. So hopefully this video helped you guys a little bit. I'm going to be doing a few more. I'm going to try and be putting them out consistently. I'm not going to do any gameplay in this video, but the next few we're going to be looking at some interesting matches. I'm going to be doing some live commentary, giving some more tips on the actual gameplay part of it. So stay tuned in, get on the forums, get on the Discord server, check out my YouTube channel, and keep playing. Love this game. Want to see you guys all get better and enjoy it as much as I have. Thanks for watching.